Okay, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think we're ready to go and get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, Making Communications Accessible by Design. My name is Tina McCorkindale, and I am the president and CEO of the Institute for Public Relations. We are a nonprofit research foundation, and we focus on research that matters to the profession. So before we begin, please note that we will have time for Q&A with our speakers at the end of the webinar. At the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A box. If at any time you have any questions, you can click on the box and type in your questions there. We will collect the questions and moderate the Q&A at the end of the webinar. Please only ask your questions in the Q&A and not in the chat, as questions may get lost in the chat. You are also welcome to use the chat function to leave comments, interact with fellow attendees, and include resources. We are recording this session. We will send it out with the resources in the next day or two. So let's get to it. When Current Global launched Accessible by Design, a commitment that every piece of communication it develops, curates, and publishes will meet the highest accessibility standards, it hoped to spark a marketing industry movement. I will tell you from personal experience at IPR, we use this guide and we have changed our guidelines based on the work that they have done. Closing the disability inclusion gap is not just the right thing to do, but it makes business sense. Today, you'll be armed with new research about why this work is so important, tools to help you make accessible communications a daily habit, and inspiration to start thinking about how disability inclusive marketing ideas can make a big business impact. Leading today's webinar are Virginia Devlin. She's the CEO of Current Global, who is working to turn this movement for the agency into an industry movement. Rebecca Rousell, Vice President of DE&I Communications, and Sena, who joined the Current Global team to champion the effort, is bringing her personal experience as a person with multiple disabilities, including blindness, to bear on the work. So thank you all for being here today and this initiative. And with that, Virginia, I'd like to give you the floor.
Thank you so much, Tina, and welcome everyone. We really appreciate you joining us today. As Tina said, what started as an agency initiative is gaining steam as an industry movement. We have research, guidelines, new client offerings in development, and a growing roster of agencies and organizations who are making the commitment to make their work accessible by design. So we really appreciate IPR's support of this initiative. And in May, Fast Company named Accessible by Design as one of its 2021 world-changing ideas. So a proud moment for Team Current Global, and something we were really happy to see recognized outside of our industry. So let's talk more on the next slide about how we can make this world-changing idea something that's really important to the communications industry. There's a clear business need to make our communications and content accessible by design. I'm going to assume that all of us have rightly stepped up our own efforts around DE&I. Rebecca joined our agency a few months ago as we are prioritizing that work, as I'm sure many of you are. And we're certainly counseling more and more of our clients on DEI best practices. But look at this stat from the World Economic Forum, Valuable 500 group. 90% of companies are saying they prioritize diversity, but only 4% are focused on making offerings inclusive of people with disabilities. So that is a clear example of an opportunity for organizations to do better. Only 4% is kind of a startling number. So if we go to the next slide, here's a few more facts. Over 1 billion people, nearly 15% of our global population have a disability. And this is one population group that anyone could join at any time in our lifetimes. So that's something to be cognizant of as well. This large market segment controls $8 trillion of buying power, but companies rarely create content and campaigns that include them. So we recognize the need to do better. We launched Accessible by Design to ensure that our work is accessible to audiences of all abilities. And we're especially focused as communicators on people with sight, hearing, speech, and cognitive disabilities. To meet the highest accessibility standards, we leverage accessibility guidelines and tools throughout the content creation process for both internal and external assets. And so today we're going to share how you can start doing that as well. We all love research. We all love data. Data helps us, convince our clients and our organizations of important things that we need to do. So we wanted to arm communication pros with some powerful research about why disability inclusive marketing is so important. And I'm going to turn over the sharing of our research results to Sena. But first, why did we do this? We wanted to illuminate, the key accessibility barriers. And so what we did is we surveyed 800 people in the US and UK who had disabilities like vision loss or hearing loss. We partnered with IPG Media Lab and Magna to do this study. And we explored the lived experiences of consuming content as people with sight, hearing, speech, and cognitive disabilities. So what follows are some of the highlights of that research. So over to you, Sena.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Sena. Since I'm legally blind, I rely on assistive tools such as a screen reader, audio description, alternative text, also known as alt text, to impactfully engage with brands and their content. I was impressed by how well our research results illustrated my lived experiences consuming content as a person with a disability. Let's dive into the data. First, social media is a struggle for many of us. A fifth of participants said social media is very difficult to access and consume content on, making it the most problematic media channel. I agree with this. The difficult screen reader user experience leads me to actively avoid social media, especially Instagram. However, I'm forced to use LinkedIn to further my career. However, it remains a frustrating experience because LinkedIn posts often contain images without alternative text. Likewise, I have never seen a video on LinkedIn with audio description. The absence of these accessibility features indicate that this content has not been created to be accessible for users with sensory disabilities. Next slide, please. Second, assistive tools fail to fix the problem. 64% of respondents who use an assistive tool said that they experience challenges consuming content, with 30% of these respondents indicating they have issues with the content itself, directly pointing to where brands have an opportunity to help. For example, I use a screen reader. The screen reader cannot independently recognize an image and accurately describe it and in accurate detail. Instead, I rely on content creators to publish pictures and provide detailed alternative text. So the screen reader can read the alt text and then inform me about the image. Next slide, please. Third, accessible communications impacts actions and attitudes towards brands, affecting the bottom line. As anticipated, our findings indicated inaccessible communications yield negative outcomes. When communications is inaccessible, 40% of participants said they would take negative reactions towards a brand, including not purchasing from it and not recommending it to family and friends. Also, 81% of participants said inaccessible communications evokes negative emotions towards a brand, including feeling disconnected from the brand, feeling less excited about the brand, feeling the brand lacks positive qualities, and feeling the brand is unreliable. This is true for me too. When I'm looking to make a purchase, I will explore a brand's website. If the website is inaccessible, I will stop considering the brand, start considering another, and then discourage family and friends from wasting their time with that brand. Conversely, accessible communications yields positive outcomes. When a brand's communication is accessible, 60% of participants said they would take positive actions towards a brand, including purchasing it over another and recommending it to family and friends. Additionally, 81% of participants said Accessible communications evokes positive emotions towards the brand, such as feeling connected to the brand, feeling excited about the brand, feeling the brand possesses positive qualities, and feeling the brand is reliable. This is true for me too. When a brand's communications and user experience is accessible, I feel excited. And I appreciate when the company shows me through their communications that they thought of me. As a result, I am more likely to try a brand, its products, and its services. If the brand's products and services work for me, I often become a brand evangelist, adamantly advocating for it, for the brand among family and friends. On behalf of the disabled community, thank you all so much for investing your time to learn how to make your content and campaigns accessible. And now here is Rebecca with information about how you can get started.
Thanks, Sena. I know everyone is definitely sitting and wondering how you can get started. So we are here to tell you. Next slide, please. We've created guidelines in partnership with the PRCA, which is the world's largest PR professional body and industry organization based in the UK, as well as the PR Council here in the US. The guidelines are a thorough overview of the following. First, accessibility features on social media. Also utilizing Microsoft's accessibility checker to ensure documents that you are creating are accessible. Learning more about how to use audio descriptions, alternative text, and closed caption options, as well as making your hosted events the most accessible, and a lot more that are included in those guidelines. Next slide. I know it seems daunting, but the ask is not to be perfect at the moment from day one. We certainly aren't perfect. But the ask is to make the intentional commitment to do the work to making all of your communications accessible. We do the basics for free for our clients. It becomes as natural as spell check. And after deciding to commit, write a manifesto that outlines what that commitment is, what you'll be doing, and why you believe that this is important. Share it broadly, share it externally, share it internally, so that your colleagues can start believing in that and support your efforts. Display it in your office and also include it in your credentials and post it on your website. Finally, look for support internally. Look for volunteers and champions within your organization, as we quickly found volunteers to help us with this effort internally, but then also around the world who have definitely made this vital commitment as we have, because they are connected to the cause. Next slide. But there's also a way that you can personally get involved. And here's some additional individual steps that you can take. First, familiarize yourself with the PRCA guidelines that we will provide and how comprehensive they are, but they're absolutely user-friendly. The second thing is use your checklist from the guidelines. Share it with your team members, talk it through to kick off a project, and keep referencing it until accessibility becomes a natural part of everything that you do and everything that you produce. Add influential voices in the disability arena to your must-read listen list. There's a bevy of organizations, including organizations such as DisabilityN, that offer resources, offer guides and articles, and everything that you can actually use to continue to really learn more about this space, and to also just, again, broaden your resources in the accessibility arena and to learning more about the disabled community. The fourth thing, be conscious of your own writing and content and making sure that you are, before you press send on anything or before you do a finalized project, that you've made sure that this is accessible. You think about others who are possibly reading this that might have a disability. And then the fifth thing, bring this big, important idea to your clients. Sharing is caring, and it's definitely the most important thing, that how we will continue to make sure that this particular commitment is shared broadly. We want to make sure that you are sharing this with your colleagues, but then also making sure that you share this with your clients as well. Next slide. So what's next for us at Current Global? We're working on a couple of things that we are extremely excited about as far as some further offerings for our clients. The first is really taking the guidelines that we've created to develop training modules on topics that are really included to really actually teach teams, for example, like communications teams and designs teams, to help them implement accessibility in their specific areas. The next thing that we are working on is a client audit, where we've outlined a comprehensive process that our agency team will adhere to when prospecting and onboarding and executing the audit for clients that will really go deeper into checkpoints. It'll be inclusive of looking at how to really look at how to work with talent that are people who have disabilities. Also some suggested internal, external documents for development, budget implications, and a whole lot more. So we're really excited about this effort. And again, I just want to reiterate, it's definitely not to be perfect right off the bat from day one, but to really just be intentional about making that commitment. And we're here to help you guys along the way. And I'll turn it over to Virginia, who'll give you guys some examples of some brands that are already doing some great things to making their content and brands accessible.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I will just reiterate, it's progress over perfection. That's really important. We don't want people to feel intimidated that this is such a big task. And to Rebecca's point, we're learning every day, oftentimes with Sena's help, on how to do this better. So now we wanted to sort of pivot a little bit and move from, what are the tools and guidelines that you can use to make the content you're creating more accessible, to how do you take this idea of accessible work and bringing it into something bigger. So if we go to the next slide, just thinking about how, think about how you can make accessibility part of your client campaigns. It's beyond the content you create. How can you incorporate disability inclusive concepts into events, influencer marketing, the work that you're doing? So we look at the next slide. We wanted to share a couple examples. And in this case study for Microsoft is really the spark that created the Accessible by Design movement at Current Global. We work with Microsoft in EMEA and across APAC. And our London team was working with them on a project. Diversity and inclusion is top of mind for business leaders as we look to create the workforces and the creative needed to reach the audiences of tomorrow. Yet an easy opportunity with Microsoft's built-in accessibility solutions allows us to better include a fifth of the global population with daily communications. That's not widely adopted. So what Microsoft was finding is we've created these tools. We have these accessibility checkers that people can use, just like spell check, but they're not using it. And so think about how, we are missing a fifth of the population. So our team supported Microsoft with a campaign called The Fifth, which aimed to highlight the business value of embracing accessibility. So we created a series of visuals and other content to support a wider storytelling around accessibility, and just showing imagine if a fifth of your keyboard didn't work or a fifth of your screen didn't work. That's how businesses who are not embracing accessibility are missing out on reaching a really important group of people. And then we follow that up with something we called the Work Life Hacks series, which highlighted Microsoft tools and features useful for all workers, including those with disabilities. So when our team worked on this with Microsoft, we just had that aha moment and said, why aren't we doing this ourselves as a matter of a best practice? And from there, the spark of Accessible by Design was born. The next slide is not our work. It's work by a sister agency of ours, Weber Shandwick. Current is part of the IPG family of agencies. And I just thought this was a great example from a couple of years ago about how you can make a product more accessible. So, with the number of people in the world who are colorblind, it's 350 million people. It happens more frequently in men than women. But, Uno is a game that probably everyone's played Uno before. The colors really matter on that card game. And if you're red, green colorblind, it's very hard to distinguish. So they had the brilliant idea a few years ago to create a version that gave signals to people with color blindness of, which cards and patterns work together. And then they followed it up a few years later by actually putting Braille on the cards, so people who are visually impaired would be able to play the game as well. So just a great example about, thinking about how a client's product could become more accessible to people with disabilities. And on the next slide, probably everyone saw more recently the great product launch from Degree and Unilever, where they created the world's first adaptive deodorant built with a diverse disability community. So here was a terrific example of a company that involved the community it was trying to impact in the product development. That made national news, probably global news. And then we also saw Starbucks starting to put Braille on some of its packaging and its menus in its stores. So I just encourage people to think about, how can you take ideas to your clients that are inclusive of the disabled community. And then finally, on the last slide, as communications practitioners, we do a lot of events in our world. And how do you take this through to the events? We were inspired by the Oscars this past year, not only from disability inclusion was certainly highlighted through some of the, the films that were up for awards. I think this was really the first time that diversity at the Oscars included, a nod to people with disabilities. You had disability representation in the films. You had a first ever accessible stage. So for people in wheelchairs, they were more easily able to get up on the stage. The fantastic Google ad that aired as a sponsor of the show, which probably brought tears to everyone's eyes. It was just a nice example of how, being there live or experiencing it virtually, there's things you can build in to be inclusive to a disabled audience. So we go to the next slide. So that's just a little inspiration for how we can bring it into our client work. We've created a website that we hope everyone will check out, accessiblecommunications.com. There you will find a deeper dive into the research that Sena highlighted earlier. You'll be able to download and view the guidelines we created with the PRCA and the PR Council. And we're starting to populate this site with more best practices, relevant news, case studies. So stay tuned for that. It's a little bit of a work in progress right now, but we're getting there. And we're really working to make sure that this is one of the most accessible websites you'll see, being able to give people the choice to change the colors, change the font size, just so they're better able to navigate the website. So check that out if you want to learn more. And then on the next slide, we hope that you make the commitment with us. On the website, you'll see that there is an opportunity to request a commitment form. And really, we want to see this turn into an industry movement. And by signing the commitment, it means that your organization is going to commit to making your content accessible from conception to delivery. You're going to help bridge our industry's disability inclusion gap. And you'll get credit for furthering the accessible communications revolution, if you will. We would love to see that accessible communications website filled with logos of organizations who have, pledged to move this work forward. And on the next slide, we want to thank our early adopters. It was Global Accessibility Awareness Day a couple weeks ago, and so we gave a shout out at that time to our early supporters. Of course, the Institute for Public Relations is highlighted on there. But you'll just see that we have agencies and organizations from around the world that are taking notice of this initiative and agree with the importance of it and are joining it. So we hope more of you will join as well. And I think I have one more slide just to share our contact information. You heard from myself, Rebecca, and Sena today. Lisa Dini, who is on the line but not speaking today, also is helping us lead the charge at Current Global on Accessible by Design. And any one of us would be happy to talk to you more about making the commitment, the guidelines, the research results, etc. So I think we've actually given ourselves a lot of time for Q&A, Tina. So if we want, we can open it up for questions.
That is great. We do have some questions coming in, so that's perfect. Amanda asks, Hi, I work with the communications team that creates videos. What do you recommend using for caption creation software, or do you use tools from YouTube, etc.? What we use currently has a cost, so it limits what we can do.
Sena, did you want to, I couldn't tell if you were like
Oh,
leaning
yes,
forward because you
of
wanted
course.
to answer that.
So one of the tools that we use is we use a company called 3Play Media for closed captions. But there's also another accessibility feature that I strongly encourage recommending to make your videos accessible for blind users as well, which is audio description. And it is a secondary track which will describe the visual components, and also transcripts, which will describe which will allow people to go back and read like the conversation. And 3Play Media offers all of these services.
Yeah, and we found 3Play Media to be inexpensive. It's not a huge cost when we're adding this on. And I will say this question is a great question, because I think that it's easy for us as if we're writing something, it's easy for us to use an accessibility checker and make sure that our press release or our media pitch or whatever that piece of content is accessible from that aspect. But when you get into the production of visuals and graphics and more imagery, that's when the work gets a little bit harder. And so our design and production team certainly has been learning since we launched this internally in December, how to get better at that. That's probably where, within your organizations is the heavier lift, is on that sort of creative and content production side of the business.
Okay, next question. So I know you went through like the journey, here's how you start, but can you maybe go into a little more detail? If you're starting your journey, where do you start? Is it the website, social media? And then, Rebecca, are you charged with this? And then you work with Sena, or how do you manage this within your organization? Is it everyone's responsibility, or how does it work as well? So it's a two-part question, sort of the steps, and where does it sit within your organization to make sure everyone's doing what they should be doing?
Sure. No. So the steps, I think, like we talked about, is really, I think, definitely reviewing those guidelines. I know for us, that was definitely a big sort of aha moment to even really help us where we should start. I think you don't necessarily know what you don't know. So I know for me personally, and a lot of us on the team, really working with the PRCA, also working with Sena, to really outline like what was challenging for her as she was coming into the fold too as well. And then really looking and working with the PRCA to create those guidelines so we can actually understand and know where we should start. I think the other piece of that, which I think is again an easy way, I'm pretty sure many organizations do use Microsoft, and Microsoft has definitely tooled their platforms with that accessibility checker. Even when you're trying to save a document, especially if it's a PDF or a PowerPoint, it literally prompts you before you even save that to say, should we run the accessibility checker? And then you run that, and it actually tells you and gives you step by step on what to actually include in those particular documents. And I think from a company standpoint, that's where we saw the need to really help our clients from that audit perspective, to actually really sit down and take stock of what actually needs to be accessible, and what you need from all communications aspects that should be accessible. So I think those are helpful areas to really start on. And I definitely say the guidelines are really that sort of, that's really going to get that jump started to help you kind of outline where you're going to, where companies should start. And then of course, we are here as well to help and to actually have more conversations, more one-on-one conversations, depth conversations about that as well. Virginia, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
I mean, I would just say find some vocal champions within your organization who are super passionate about it. When we started talking about this internally, we had people around the world raise their hands and say, I want to be a part of this because I personally have a disability, and maybe I have not even disclosed that in the workplace yet, but now I feel comfortable doing that. This is important to me. Or, you know, my co-CEO, George Coleman in London, his father is deaf, and so is his uncle, his father's twin. So he grew up in a deaf household. This is incredibly important work. As communicators, we need to be able to communicate with everyone. So I think you'll probably find those champions within your organization who will just become, you know, evangelistic about making sure that you start to do this.
Okay, thank you. So Christine Olson asked, and then I'm going to build onto her question. Hi, Christine. We rely heavily on Yammer for engagement with our associates. Do you have any suggestions for how to make that social interaction more accessible? We're using closed captions, but I don't think it's enough to reach those who might need more of the visual or hearing needs, much less to make them truly feel included. And I would also like to hear from Sena, because as she's coming into the workforce, like what sort of accommodations, Sena, help you in your day-to-day? And then when you're coming into a workplace, how do you best manage that to make sure that you're able to do, you know, the work that you can?
So I was very fortunate that with Current Global, they initiated the conversation and said that they were determined to make this a welcoming work environment and equip me with all the resources I needed. So they set me up with a screen reader, and they also set me up with Ira. And so as a result, sorry, excuse me, my phone is talking. Hold on. I apologize. So I was hearing the questions. And it made it very easy for me to acclimate to the workplace, and they created, it's about creating a space and having these conversations that, okay, we might not have the answer right away, but we're going to work together and figure out what is the best way for you to do things, and giving me that space to try different methods of approaching things and seeing what I can do to best contribute. And you had mentioned something called Yammer. I'm not familiar with that platform.
It's like a Slack or, you know, just a sort of a messaging platform internally.
It's like, you know, like we use with Teams, you know, how we use
Okay.
Yammer is similar to that.
Okay, I understand. So when we're using Teams, my coworkers kindly will send a little description when they send an image, or they'll tell me what the video is about when they're sending it, so that I am able to stay in the loop with the conversation. So that's something that's helpful, as well as when we have panel discussions, we have people say their names so I can acclimate and understand who's in the room and keep track of the conversation. Things like that are very beneficial.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sena. Appreciate it. So another question we have from Kirsty and an anonymous attendee, and I'm gonna put these two together. First is, how would you recommend that company leaders incorporate disability equality into the leadership culture? But also, what do you do if you're working at a company that may be resistant to change? What advice would you give in places that are resistant to change and do these sort of things?
Well, I think it's super helpful coming from the top, that it comes from the top. So it has to be something that your leadership believes strongly in. Part of the reason why we did the research is we wanted to help people build the business case for why this is important. it's very difficult to ignore the fact that we have this massive global population of people with disabilities who are feeling ignored. And as communicators, as brands, as corporations, we see this as not only a moral imperative, but a business imperative. It's $8 trillion of buying power represented by this group. And as you heard Sena say, if someone has a website that's not accessible, I'm never going to buy anything from them. And I'm going to tell everyone I know not to support them. But if someone has, a site that is accessible or that makes me feel part of the community, then I'm going to champion that brand. So it just seems like such an important group of individuals. And like I said, any of us could join this population at any time in our lives. It's the one group that we weren't born into that we can become a part of. And so why would you ignore it? So the data is out there to say why this is important from a business perspective. We share the research we did so that you can help show why it's important from a communications perspective, especially the social media challenges. And so much of our work happens on social these days. So hopefully we've armed you with a few things that you could take to your leadership and say, this is really important. We need to get on board here and we need to start being open to this. And we're also focused on DE&I, which is incredibly important in the work that we're doing. Let's not forget this part of the equation. Let's make sure we're inclusive of people with disabilities as well.
Yes, we have a Center for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and one of our points is disability, because it is I think it's also an under-discussed area in our field that we don't talk about it enough when it affects so many people. And that's both the non-apparent disabilities as well. And there's very little research in our industry about disabilities and accommodation and that sort of thing. So the next question, and then there is another question, I'd like to find out about sort of the return to work, right? So when people are coming back to the office, people are having more remote versus, and this may be a more broader question, but more companies are going to offer flexible work, right? So you can come to the office or you can work from home. And what we've seen is that varies on the organization. Some organizations are like, you're going to be in the office 3 days a week and here are the days. And others are like, you come in the office whenever. How can we ensure accommodation for people and also equity for those with disabilities who are going to continue working from home? How do we make sure that those who physically show up in the office don't get rewarded more versus the employees with disabilities who are working from home?
That's such a big question.
I know I'm good at that, Virginia. I can
thanks,
really
Tina.
big, large questions.
Putting me on the spot. As we're thinking about our return to work, which likely won't happen until maybe September, we are not back in our offices at this point. We will move to an ideal where it's 3 days in the office, 2 days work from wherever you want, and that'll sort of be our standard moving forward. We are having those discussions though. We've all proven that we can work remote. I don't think that our work suffered through the pandemic of not being able to be together. I think there's ways that it suffered in not being able to collaborate together and have that spark of the hallway conversation that leads to an amazing idea and just the camaraderie of the team. But we proved that we can work virtual. What we have to figure out now is exactly that point. We have some people who, in our surveys who want to be in the office 5 days a week. Maybe they're just people and they need to be around others. They could have young kids at home and they're like, I need to be able to focus, whatever it is. And we have other people who say, I don't need to come back ever. Like I'm good. I'm just good working from my bedroom. So it is a balance. I don't know that I have the answer for how do we ensure that, people don't feel like they're at a disadvantage if they're not coming in. But I think it just comes down to your agency culture. My goal certainly is to not make anyone feel like they're not as valued if they aren't in. And we've certainly hired more remote employees in the last 12 months than we've ever had before. So I'm just like, okay, now we have 2 people in Atlanta. We've got Sena's in Philly and a couple other people there. I don't have an office there. And I'm not going to make, someone move to another state, unless that was something we negotiated in the beginning. So I just think the workplace needs to change in general to make sure that we learn that we can do this virtually. There's benefits to being together, but we also know that we can make people feel like part of the community if they are remote. You just have to keep working at it.
Yes, I think the remote is really interesting because it does open up a lot of possibilities to people maybe who weren't considered before because of where they live.
Or geography.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've hired amazing talent in places where we don't have offices, and it's great.
Can I share something?
Yes, please.
One of the benefits of providing this remote option is it enables people who wouldn't normally have the opportunity because of where they are geographically. For example, I really struggled to break into the industry. And the way that I did that was through a New York Women in Communication scholarship that I was able to intern at Weber Shandwick in New York. And I live in Philly. And so it would have taken me 3 hours to commute. But fortunately, I was able to get funding from another organization to live in New York for those 7 weeks. I feel that most people with disabilities wouldn't have those resources to be able to do that. Being able to work remotely will enable us as an industry to expand the net of people with disabilities from different regions with different accessibility needs to be able to participate in our workforce. So I strongly encourage allowing people to utilize that as a work option.
Thank you, Sena.
Thank you, Sena. Okay. Another question. Thank you for this webinar. You're welcome. This is an industry movement. How can we increase the number of people with disabilities in the field of PR and communication? What is your agency doing to hire and retain practitioners who have visible and invisible disabilities?
Well, we're off to a great start with hiring Sena. We're so grateful that we met her. We were introduced through the PR Council. I think that we do have to make a commitment, just like we're making commitments to diversify our teams in other ways, to prioritize considering people with disabilities. It's an interesting thing because it's, oftentimes it's not a box that you check in your employment, as you're going through your employment job application. There's a lot of hidden disabilities that you may not know about that people don't disclose because they don't want to or don't feel comfortable to. And so, it's a little hard in that respect, but I think there are some good organizations that you could look into and partner with to sort of bring that forward and be more focused on it. One is a nonprofit called Creative Spirit, which is focused on creating employment opportunities for people with intellectual disabilities in the creative industry, which I think we all consider ourselves to be part of. So Creative Spirit is one to check out. And then we are partners with an organization called Disability In, which is another great resource. And Sena is actually, I don't know if I'm gonna get this title right, a fellow for their younger audiences of that organization. So I think if you just seek to find partner organizations too, that may give you access to the talent to make sure that you're considering it as you think about your open positions.
Another thing that could be helpful is building relationships with the disability departments in colleges. The government does that for their workforce recruitment program. So that's a great way to disseminate job openings and have people apply, because by doing that, you show them that you're actively looking for people like them to be part of your organization.
That's a great suggestion. I've never even thought about contacting like disability resource centers, but that's really great. Okay, I think we're out of questions. And so why don't we wrap up? If each person just wants, if everyone wants to say something in closing, that would be great. And then I'll close us out.
you. Well, thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Tina and Nikki and the IPR team for inviting us to have this important conversation. We certainly hope that we've got you thinking a bit, that we've inspired you. We hope to see you join the movement and sign that commitment form and bring your organization on board. And, we are all very passionate about this. Hopefully it's come across today, and open to carrying on conversations with this group. Rebecca put our emails in the chat so you have them, and check out the guidelines, make them part of your daily practice, use that research to help convince your leaders and clients why this is important. And we're excited to have you join us on this journey.
Thank you. Rebecca, anything to add? Did she freeze? I think
She looks kind of frozen.
She looks kind of frozen. There she goes.
But there
Rebecca,
she
do you have
is.
anything to add?
Sorry, I froze at the moment. My goodness. Definitely the words of 2021, frozen, Zoom. No, but I just wanted to add, we counsel organizations all the time and our clients. One thing that we're really talking about is really the expectations of today's workforce. I think what we've seen with just even this pandemic, but then also unrest last year, and then just making sure that we are being very attentive to what diversity, equity, inclusion means and what that means for all DEI. And we leave our clients with this. Today's workforce has to include empathy, has to include cultural intelligence, inspiration, plans of action, purpose, and transparency. I would probably guess that probably maybe 10 or 20 years from now, prior to this time that we're in, those weren't things that were coming up or bubbling up, but we're in a space now where we have to shift. And what we're doing right now is part of that intentional commitment to shifting and to really being very, very intentional about it being inclusive of this place, in this space of all DEI. So just wanted to leave everyone with that. And hopefully, again, as Virginia mentioned, this definitely inspired everyone, and we will continue to do this great work with everyone along the ride for us.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. Sena.
I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for taking this first crucial step and opening your hearts and minds to making the effort to make your content and campaigns more inclusive. For us, for people with disabilities, it matters that you try. We're not looking for perfection, we're looking for effort. And so thank you for putting the effort in by being here today. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you to the three of you, Sena, Virginia, and Rebecca. I also have to say it's Sena's birthday. Sena spent her birthday with us. I would sing, but everyone would leave the call immediately, so I will not. I will not. But I just want to say, I hope you have a great birthday. And thank you, Sena. Thank you, Virginia, Rebecca. You're all awesome. We will take resources and we will send that all to you at the end of the webinar. Nikki's on our team is fantastic. She gets that out really fast. Just so you know, Sena, everyone's wishing you happy birthday in the chat.
Oh, thank you so much.
Happy birthday.
So happy birthday. So thank you all and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Bye. Take care.